Okay, good afternoon, everybody. Thank you so much for coming. Open up by first thanking our hostess, Frida, for the second time now. So we're on repeats already. But thank you so much for opening your home to us as always. Today's class is Leilu Nishmat Eliyahu ben Simbol and Natan ben Chana. The Divrei Torah and the Berachot will hopefully be Leilu Nishmatam. Okay, so what I thought we would talk about today is about talking, right? It's about speech. We all sense the importance of speech in our day-to-day lives. Obviously, we use it to communicate. We cannot survive without speaking. Anybody ever do a tani dibur, go a full day without speaking? Right? You've done that before? On Yom Kippur, you got laryngitis. That's a good day to have laryngitis. It's not much going on elsewise. Well, speaking of that, has anybody ever had just not been able to talk for a day? Not because you did a fasting of tibur, but just because you didn't have a voice and you kind of had to whatever. It could be a very frustrating type of feeling. I know one of my colleagues, Rabbi Tobias, has been struggled in a number of times with his voice, wasn't able to talk, and he told us about his experiences, and you could only imagine that not being able to talk for an extended period of time is incredibly frustrating. Just basic things that we take for granted become very, very challenging to do when you have to communicate them in a lot of different ways. But that's just on a utilitarian level. That's just from a simple, how do I communicate, how do I get my point across level. We also understand that speech is an even deeper, more important aspect of what makes us a human being. So if we go back a couple of parashiyot to Bereshit, and we read about how Hashem created the human being, and it says that God made the man into a nefesh chaya, a living soul, a living being. To which the translation of Unkilu says, what does it mean that God made man a living soul, a living being? He made him a ruach memalela, a speaking creation. What separates mankind from all of the rest of the animal kingdom and the rest of the existence of the world is that we're able to communicate through speech. In fact, the rabbis categorize, as you go through creation, all of existence into four categories. It starts with domem, things that are inanimate, silent. This glass is domem. Then you have things that are tzomeach, things that grow, trees, fruits, plant life. Then you have chai, things that are alive, animals, insects, fish, all part of chai. And then the highest level of being is midaber, is the human being who can speak and communicate through speech. Now, animals in the animal kingdom can communicate in a lot of different ways, and you would call that their speech. But human speech is qualitatively different than any other form of communication that goes on in the rest of the world. Because our speech has the ability to share ideas. It expresses thought and creativity and imagination. Our speech has the ability to lift people up and make them feel good, or unfortunately the opposite, put people down and make them feel sad and bad, and everything else in between. We have the ability to spread information about people in a positive way or in a negative way. So our speech is incredibly powerful and incredibly different than any other type of speech or communication that goes on in the animal kingdom. The rabbis have a very frightening statement about someone who uses nibul peh, someone who uses foul language or foul words. Say the rabbis in Masechet Shabbat on Daf Lamed Gimel Amud Aleph, they say somebody who uses foul language, even if they have 70 years of positive decrees upon them, it flips it over. Because when a person defames himself through the one tool that makes him a human being, which is speech, all of a sudden you take yourself out of the category of being a human being and you lower yourself into the rest of the animal world. And so literally our essence as a human being, what makes us who we are, lives and dies by the way we speak and communicate to each other. And so with that background in mind, I think it's important for us to open up a discussion and share thoughts together, hopefully, about how do we carry positive conversations? How do we make the most of our speech? What tools and strategies can we employ to communicate what we want in the way that we want, and also to engage in meaningful conversations with our friends, our parents, our children, our rabbis, our teachers, etc. There's nothing more uplifting than when a person has a good conversation with somebody and feels like they made headway, they grew, they learned something from those people. There are people, maybe not as many as we would hope, who we love to be in a conversation with them. We love to talk to them because we feel different when we're done with that conversation. And there's probably a lot more people who we just can't stand to talk to whatsoever. And after we finish talking to them, we just remind ourselves, remind me never to go next to that person and have a conversation with them. And so the question that I present is, what makes a great conversation? Why do you enjoy speaking to certain people? And what makes somebody just not the type of person you want to engage in conversation with? And that can maybe open up a window into how our speech is powerful. So I'll just throw that out. Yeah, Frida. So when you speak to someone who listens to what you're saying, then you feel like you want to continue to speak to them, right? What makes a good listener? How do you know if someone's listening to you?
My shirt is green, and someone else says, "Oh, my shirt is green too."
Why? What is it? What is that? Yes, right? Okay, good. So you actually took me to page 2, but we'll bounce around because I wrote things off in it. That's a very good point, and you gave a very simple example. I'm going to take it to like a little bit of a deeper example. You gave a very simple one, but in general, one way to not break up a conversation is don't equate your experiences with the person who you're talking to. So, right. So imagine someone's talking to you about how they just lost a relative and how difficult it is for them to go through the process. Most of us would probably respond with what? Oh, well, when I lost my this is what happened with me. When you do that, tell me, so what does that say to you? Why?
It's making them feel like it's a common occurrence and it's not a deep feeling.
Right. Common occurrence. Anything else?
I can relate, maybe we can share.
So that's what the person is doing. We're not saying that anybody has malicious intent when you're doing something like that. Most of us would do that because we want to try to relate to the person. We want to tell them, I empathize with you. I know what you're going through. I feel it. But to a certain degree, at that moment, the person doesn't want to hear about your experience. They're trying to tell you about what they're going through. And you turned it over into, well, this is what happened when I was. But maybe our experiences are not the same. We're two very different people. What we're going through might not be the same. Everybody's experiences are unique. And there's so many variables that go into it that while one person losing their father and another person losing their father on the surface seems the same, they're not the same. Everybody's experiences are unique. And when you equate your experiences to theirs, you might be belittling it inadvertently. Again, not intentionally, but inadvertently you're belittling it. You're also showing the person you're not really paying attention to them. You're just looking for the opportunity to make the conversation about you instead of talking about what they're going through. Tell me what you're experiencing. How can I help you? What would you need from me? Those are the types of things that people want to hear in that conversation. And when you have that in that way, then when the conversation goes the opposite way, you'll get that back, hopefully, from that person. When you're in a conversation with someone who makes it about them, takes everything that you say and says it about, well, how does that fit into their life? You don't feel like you want to continue that conversation because I'm not growing as a result of it. The person's just making it about them. Anybody have any? Yeah, go ahead.
Or they make you laugh.
Mm-hmm.
That's somebody you want to be talking to. The person who's going to depress you and always be a Debbie Downer.
Right.
That's not who you're going to gravitate.
No question about it. So I have that. There is a very well-known leader. He's a guy who's an expert in communications and sound, and he records what he calls the 7 sins of speaking. 7 things not to do in conversation. And when people do these things, people stop wanting to engage in conversation with them. Your speech is not going to be impactful. He puts negativity as number 3. People just generally don't want to be around others who are negative. They sap their strength. They make them tired. You're in a conversation with them. At the end of it, you feel like, God, I'm exhausted. Like, how do I, and then on the other hand, when you speak to somebody who's really upbeat and everything's great, and the sun is shining and I'm so happy and whatever it is, it's infectious. All of a sudden you feel better, right? You just by osmosis draw in so much of that and you feel like, wow, I really like speaking to this person.
To branch off on that, I think that something that discourages people from wanting to go to is false positivity, that overly sugary sweet. So we're going through something, you're not supposed to say, it's fine, it's okay, just trust in Hashem,
Right.
everything's gonna be wonderful.
Right.
Sometimes people need to talk about it and be heard without that cheerleader all the time. So I think there's a very fine.
You're
line.
saying the person who's responding to your issue,
If
or
I had a problem and I'm
Right.
telling you,
right?
and you keep saying, "In Hashem's hands, everything's gonna be so good.
Right.
don't worry."
Pretty, it's right,
It's
insensitive to a degree.
sometimes they're not
right, right.
validation.
Right. So sometimes the validation is important, and then you can insert that type of approach, right? The idea of Hashem being involved in a way, if you have a good relationship with that person, in a way where it doesn't seem like you're coming off condescending or up on your perch where, how come you don't have the same level of emunah or trust in Hashem that I have, right? Meanwhile, you're not the one going through the trouble, so you're not the one who's struggling with it at that moment. And if the tables were turned, you probably wouldn't want that. So responding to people and interacting with them at their level where they're at, based on what their needs are, instead of what you want to try to convey, is, I think, also very, very important, no question. Negativity's ugly cousin is sin number 4, complaining, right? People who are just naggers and complainers all the time, again, saps your strength. It's like a form of negativity as well, but also like people don't always most want to hear about how everything is bad and everything is wrong. And also complaining by nature is such that the person's not really looking for a solution. They're not really trying to see how they can make it better. We're not against pointing out things that are not perfect, right? Everybody has things that are wrong. Schools have things that they do wrong. Shuls have things they do wrong. Chesed organizations make mistakes. Everybody has things that they don't do perfectly, right? So, we could raise issues and say, how do we fix this? Let's talk about solutions, right? Let's have a good conversation about what went wrong and how we can work on it. And maybe we don't come to a solution, but at least we're working towards something, versus just venting and complaining can sometimes, it doesn't really give you any productivity. And it also doesn't make the other person feel like they really want to engage in a conversation like that. Any other things that sins of conversation?
If I were you, I'd do this.
Uh-huh. You don't like that. Uh-huh. Right. Is there a particular, I'm going to add one thing though that I think makes a difference. It's getting advice givers from people who you might not really be asking for advice from, right? In other words, if you're having a conversation with your daughter or you're having a conversation with your spouse, there's sort of like an implied idea that you're going to have a back and forth in which they might try to give it to you. But if you're having a conversation with a random person, they're all of a sudden telling you what to do. It's like, whoa, we don't have that relationship just yet, right? We have to kind of work to trust each other to the point where I can do that. Advice giving might be, the person could be trying to help the situation, right? But as I'm playing the other role, sometimes only give advice if you really think it's going to be, if you're asked, or if you think it'll be helpful, or the person would accept your advice, right? Yeah, I think that's important. Sometimes giving advice could also be looked at again as trying to equate your thing. This is what I would do, and the person's not validating what you may be going through. So someone else said, yeah.
Someone was said about they had instead of fueling the fire, calm them down a little bit instead of like, yeah, you're right, you're 100% right, being wrong, being upset, maybe try and feel the other side of it. So,
So that's a skill you're saying would help us to be able to be successful in conversation.
Right, but I'm saying one of the other things is someone who's fueling the fire, like one of the 7 sins would be,
Right. So you're saying people don't like, in general, people don't want to have those fires fueled. If they're in that type of situation, they want someone to kind of diffuse the situation. I could see it going both ways. I think that might depend a little bit on a person's personality. Sometimes people will go over to their spouse and tell them a story. And if the spouse says, I kind of don't think you're right. Well, he's not defending me. Why don't you defend me? I was right. Well, you're looking for the person to pile on, right? So I think it kind of depends on the context and who you're speaking with and the personality of the people involved. I definitely would say, as a person who I don't ever think that fueling the fire really ever helps the situation. I think that you want to try to work the person through a productive process, but I think that's an entirely different conversation altogether. So I'll go through a couple of the other ones that we haven't mentioned over here. Number one, he says, is gossip. When people engage in any type of gossip, lashon hara, in a lot of ways, right? It might seem fun to some people at first, and it's like, oh, I love getting that juicy nugget. But in the end of the day, people don't really have deep conversations and get very close and attached to people who are always gossiping, who are always that lashon hara person, right? They'll have a lot of very superficial things for when people need information from them. But as far as deep, meaningful relationships, they won't have them. Why do you think that is? Exactly, because if I know that this person is gossiping about X, Y, and Z, the second I'm out of their presence, I'm like, how do I know they're not doing that about me with that person? They probably are. So I'm not going to want to have conversations with that person. I'm not going to want to build friendship with that person because that person has no allegiance. So you don't realize that when we are gossipers, when we are speaking lashon hara, we're actually turning people off. We might think that we're using it to get people to be interested in what we're saying, but long-term, we're actually turning people off from what we're saying. We're going to find that people are going to stop listening to us, stop engaging us in conversation because they don't want to be the ones who are spoken about. Number two, judging. This is probably one of the biggest ones why it's difficult to sometimes communicate with our youth, with our teenage son or daughter, right? Teenagers have a very, very sensitive sense of being judged. When they feel like, especially from an adult, is judging them, they're going to shut down right away. They're not going to want to have a conversation. They're going to give very little. That's when you're getting those one-word answers with the head down like that in the kitchen, and you're trying to get something out of it. You know, why didn't you do well on that test? How come you didn't study? Those types of conversations, immediately they're on the defensive right away. They feel that they're being judged. That conversation is stonewalled. It's not going anywhere. And I'm bringing it as a teenager thing, but it's the same with us. If we're having a conversation with somebody, we're talking to them about life, and they say to us, and we feel like this person is really judging me, right? I feel like I can't really be myself. I don't want to say this because they're going to think X, Y, and Z about me. Then that's not a deep conversation that you're going to want to have with somebody. People will want to be engaged with people who feel like they're getting the benefit of the doubt. This person is going to take what I'm going to say. They're not going to judge me. They're going to try to respond to me in a way that meets me where I'm at and helps me to work through whatever it is that I'm going through, or at least just talks to me on the level that I feel like I should be, with dignity and respect. So judging, certainly, when judging is going on, you put yourself here, you put the speaker down there. That gap is going to make it very difficult for people to want to have a conversation with each other. I said negativity. We talked about complaining. Number 5, excuses. Nobody wants to talk to somebody who's always giving excuses for why everything is going wrong in their life or why they couldn't do X, Y, and Z. And it just feels like, all right, I'm not interested, right? Nobody wants to take responsibility for what they're doing. Nobody wants to say that it's their fault. They want to just offshoot the blame. I like the term that Julian Treasure, who's the one who comes up with this, he says it's called the blame thrower. Blame thrower, right? People like to just put blame on everybody. It's everyone else's fault. That doesn't mean that there aren't other people who do things wrong, but what good does that do? You want to take responsibility and say, what did I do wrong? And how can I do better? People like those types of conversations. Number 6, people who lie, people who don't tell the truth. That's a simple one. Nobody wants to be in a conversation with somebody who's giving you misinformation, false facts, things that didn't really happen, totally deceiving you, not something that you're going to want to be involved in. Number 7 is my favorite one. It's probably the one that is making it the most difficult for people in today's day and age to be able to talk to each other. And that he calls dogmatism. What does dogmatism mean? It means when you express your opinion on something as a fact. When you tell somebody something that you have an opinion about, but you say it to them as a fact, that person shuts down. That person's not going to have a conversation, right? When you say something as, I kind of think it's like this, and the person says, well, I think it's like that. That's an interesting. Explain to me more about your opinion. When you feel like you're engaging in a curious conversation with somebody where you feel like you have something to learn, you have something to offer, but you also feel like you have something to learn, then that other person feels like, hey, go back to Frieda's point, they're listening to me because I could change their mind. I can open them up. You're going into a conversation with the idea that this person has something to offer that I might not have. Most people don't enter conversations like that anymore today. Most people, it is, I'm right. I'm going to tell you why I'm right. And I'm going to force my opinion onto you until you tell me that you're right. And if you don't agree with me in the other conversation, that's the last conversation we ever had, right? And that's the way the world is communicating today, as the world becomes so polarized more and more and more and more, because technology is also a major part of this. What technology is doing is it feeds people the exact thing that they want to hear constantly, right? The algorithms of YouTube and Instagram and everything are just feeding everybody what they already believe. Most people are dating people and getting into relationships with people who already know before they started the relationship, this person believes what I believe. So now I can get into a relationship with them. People don't want to start up relationships with people who think a little bit differently than them anymore, right? Either because they're nervous they're going to change their opinion, maybe they might be wrong, or they just don't want to deal with it. They just don't want to have those types of real conversations that we once used to want to have. Thoughts on, so that one really resonated with me a lot, because I think all of us are guilty of all of these, by the way, at some point or another, myself and everyone's, we all enter conversations like this. It's important to kind of be aware of them, and by being aware of it, we can kind of stop it. And now what we'll do is we'll talk about the positive side of each of these, where if we start employing positive speech, we'll all of a sudden find ourselves committing these sins of speech a little bit less. Anybody have anything to add that I didn't put in here, or comments about any of the things that we said? Yeah.
I just thought something interesting about what you were saying, how Instagram and YouTube feeds what you're interested in and reinforces those beliefs, and how you more and more think that you're right, even if you're not. And in college, like all the debate classes we took, you had week 1, you had to debate one side, and then week 2, you had to go on the complete opposite side and debate the other side.
It's a good exercise.
And it was a great exercise in having to really, truly, passionately research and see both sides of the story.
Yeah, because there's so much gray in the world, right? There's so much gray in the world, and we understand this, but we just don't want to come to terms with how much there is in between. We're probably not right. They're probably not right. It's probably somewhere in the middle. And the more we're able to have meaningful conversations with people, the more agreeable we become, the more we'll learn, and actually the more meaningful relationships we'll go ahead and create. And that's really what fuels us as people. When we have really good relationships with people, we're happier people, we're more productive people, and I think we find a lot more purpose and meaning in life that really drives us. I think that's super important. So part 2 here is to try to shift away from the negative things that we all do and say, well, how can we solve these, right? It's kind of hard to be aware of all 7 of these, but if you start practicing the positive side of things, and we're going to give 4 things that Julian Treasure brings that I think connect with what the rabbis say, I think we'll ultimately be able to start retraining ourselves to have positive conversations. He says, use the acronym HAIL, H-A-I-L, right? Like to hail a taxi cab means like to greet somebody enthusiastically. He says, think about those 4 letters and what they mean. And if you try and use those in your daily conversations, you'll see your interactions becoming a lot better. And you'll see more people, by the way, wanting to talk to you. I don't know if that's something you want, but you might start seeing people wanting to talk to you, right? Number 1, so H-A-I-L. Let's see if we can get it. Anybody? Hello, greeting people for sure. We'll think a little bit broadly, right? You want to be happy? He's going to get to something like that. Why do you want to hesitate? I like that, thinking before you speak. He says to speak with honesty. H is honesty, right? People like to be in conversations with people who they feel they're honest with them. You feel like you're getting the truth from that person. That doesn't mean you have to be brutally honest, right? You're not going around to people telling them all of the things that you're bothering you about them, right? But the sense is when you're having a conversation with somebody, you feel like that person is being honest with you. And when that person is being honest with you, you can go ahead and be honest with them, right? Number 2, he says A is authenticity. You're speaking to somebody who is being authentic. You're seeing their true self. And as a result, you can also be your true self. The best kinds of conversations that you have with people, the best relationships that you have with people are the people you can be vulnerable with. Think about the best relationships you have, your spouse, your children, maybe your parents, right? those are the people who you feel I could say anything to them. And again, I'm not going to get judged, right? They're going to respond to me. They're always going to care for me. And they're going to try to help me through whatever it is that I'm going through, right? Or they're going to at least respond to me in a way that I feel I'm getting some sense of truth from them, right? So you want to be able, if you're in a conversation with somebody and you're saying to yourself, I can't say this to them because of X, I can't be authentic, I can't be myself, those are not going to be the most meaningful conversations that you have. There's a fakeness to them. I'm sure everyone has had a conversation with somebody at some point where you walked away and you said, wow, that person is really fake, right? That person is not giving me who they really are. They're putting on a total facade and fraud. And I'm not getting the real person who I really want to get because I really want to know this person. I feel I have something to learn from them. But if they're not being authentic with me, why should I have that? I'm not going to learn anything from this conversation. People hate fakeness, right? And I'm sure at the same time, we've had conversations with people in which we've been very fake, where we have not been our true selves, hesitated to say something, didn't really give who we are as a person, maybe because we're nervous about how the other person will take it, maybe because we're trying to, keep our image, the right way. But all of that makes for very shallow, superficial type of interaction and relationship. If you could be authentic with somebody, that's somebody who's a meaningful person to you. Those conversations are going to be true, right? The Pasuk in Tehillim says that David HaMelech tells God, Hashem hatzila nafshi, save my soul, misefat sheker, from language of falsehood, umilashon remiyah, and from language which is exalted, which is high up. What did he mean by that? I think that he understands that when you're in a conversation with someone who is not lying to you directly, but not being yourself, it's deceptive, it's not truthful, you become very, very weary of such people. You become very, very cautious. If that person could be somebody else in front of me, they're not being who they are, and I can't be who I am, I'm gonna get hurt. I'm gonna get hurt in that conversation and in that relationship from that person. And that's why people withdraw from other people in that type of way. So honesty, being truthful in your conversations, authenticity, being yourself in those conversations. You definitely want to be interesting, but interesting is in the highest of the beholder, right? There's a lot of people who could sit there and talk with you about fish all day long, and it's very interesting to them, but it's not very interesting to you. That's very subjective to be interesting. Intelligence also very, very subjective. Integrity, bingo, right? You're starting to think in that type of way. Integrity, right? What is the difference between kind of integrity and honesty and authenticity? Integrity means you're a person who keeps to your word, right? We don't love to be in relationships and engage with people who don't follow through on what they say they're going to do, right? They give a lot of, I don't know what you want to call it. A lot of fluff, a lot of, I'm going to do this, I'm going to do that, right? This goes back to what the Rabbi is saying, Pirke Abot, emor me'at va'aseh harbeh. In those situations, silence is actually the best, right? Say a little and do a lot. And if you could back up your speech with what you are doing, you're going to gain people's integrity. People are going to want to be, that person, they have integrity. I'm going to want to be in business with that person. That family, I would let my kid date into that family because they're people of integrity. They follow through on what they're going to say. And that's the type of person you're going to build a relationship with, and you're going to want to talk to because their words have meaning. When people don't follow through on what they're going to say, their words become cheap, right? So why would I want to listen to what they have to say? So it's like Charlie Brown's teacher. It's not going anywhere because they can talk from here to tomorrow. None of it's going to end up ever happening, right? Sometimes I feel like this. I have to be honest with you. In teacher orientation in the school, right? Teacher orientation, we sit there for hours and they talk about the rules and this. First day, we don't keep anything that they said. Okay, we had a 2-hour thing about wearing your badge, wearing your first day. 6 teachers in front of me walked in without the badge. I turned around and said, I'm not wearing that badge. I'm out of here. Right? That's it. We stopped wearing our badge. I'm sorry, I called you out like that. Right? She has a badge. She's doing a lot of photocopying. Yeah, see, just All in, back out. My badge, I forgot it this morning. Huh? But it's a problem. Why? Because to that degree, when they now, if they come, and they did it last year, by the way, also the January winter vacation, we're locking the doors, nobody's getting in. Second day, got in without locking the doors. The doors remain open the rest of the time, huh? So if you're going to stick to something, that's what people are going to treat it seriously, and that's what people are going to listen to it. When people say things and they don't, you become your word becomes not important, so people tune you out, right? I'm giving an example. I hope I don't get in trouble for that. Probably, but exactly. Okay, so integrity and the L. Loyal's a nice one, right? Huh? Love. I think the last one he puts it as love. But love and loyalty, by the way, are like, to a degree, two sides of the same coin, right? You can be loyal to somebody even though you don't necessarily love them, but I would argue that the two are very much related to each other. In fact, I had a professor, his name was Dr. Tawil, who was a professor of Akkadian language, a very ancient language, which he believes Hebrew kind of borrowed a lot. He says, "Ve'ahavta et Adonai Elohecha," love the Lord your God. What does that mean to love God, right? How does a person love? And love is an emotion. How do I love God? It's inanimate. I can't connect, right? Like I can say love to my spouse, to my children. How do I love God? He actually said ve'ahavta meant to be loyal to God. You show love of God through your loyalty to Hashem. You show love of your spouse when you're loyal to your spouse, right? And when God forbid somebody breaks that loyalty, you see that the love is questioned, right? In that type of a situation. So L is love. Love in the sense, not romantically, but you should speak to everybody with love in the sense that you wish them well. You want them to experience goodness, right? And when you meet people like that who talk to you in a way where you always get the sense that they want what's best for you, that they're wishing you well, that they're hoping good things come to you, those are people we gravitate towards. Those are people we love to have conversations for, because who doesn't want to be in someone who's smiling, who's genuine, who says, I hope it works out for you. I pray for you. It's going to be great. Or you're going to say Hashem's going to turn it around for you. Something like that. Not in a condescending way, but in a real way, that they really wish you well. If somebody always wishes you well, it means they're not judging you. It means they're not looking at you negatively. It means they're not lying to you. It means they're not trying to push their ideas onto you. All of those sins that we talked about in speaking, all of those things that make us recoil from people in conversation, they all go away if I genuinely feel the person I'm speaking to cares for me and wants what's best for me. And we would call that has a loving attachment to me, right? And so when you have those four things built into your conversation, all those sins kind of get pushed to the side and you start to have more meaningful conversations. People will listen to you more, right? Because they're going to open up their minds to say, wow, I can have a conversation with them. You'll listen to them as well. And all of a sudden your interactions, they become more productive and you start to learn a lot about yourself and a lot about other people. You have something, as the Mishnah in Pirke Abot says, to learn from every single person. Ezehu hacham halomed mikol adam. Who is someone who is wise? Is someone who can learn from others. And that includes your children. Right? There is much that your children can teach you. And that's why I go back to one of the difficulties that adults and children have in communicating with each other is naturally the relationship is the adult is here, the child is here, which means the adult is right, the child is wrong. That's the dogma aspect of it. That's the judging aspect of it. And that's why, teenagers just bottle up into their hole and they're so difficult to break through. But when you're able to speak to them in a way in which they don't feel like that's the case, that you're bringing yourself down to their level, and you genuinely are curious about what they did, why they did something, explain it to me, tell me about it, right? I really want to know. I want to get inside your head. I want to wish you well. I want to help you, right? I care about it. I'm not looking to punish you. I'm not looking to be your authority. I'm not looking to dominate over you. I'm looking to grow you. I want you to be better than me. When your child has that type of a feeling, all of a sudden those reservations kind of slip away. Now you're able to have a real genuine conversation. Anybody experience that a little bit? Not at all, right? Hopefully we do. I think as we mature, something happens like the second they leave high school, they kind of get into those college years. All of a sudden, mother and daughter kind of like become inseparable, right? Like I talk to my wife all the time. She's like, "Yeah, I hated my mom in high school, and then all this calls her 9 times a day. Like you can't get away from her, right? Something happens. I don't know what happens during that period of time. Anybody can help me out and try to figure out what happens during that time.
Back with such appreciation for what he grew up with and what he took for granted. And when he comes back and he hears me telling the other kid, "Put your shoes on," he's like, "Put your shoes on, Mom. I just told you to put," and he knows that.
So some of it is their experience, some of it is the natural maturity that they have to go through. But I wonder, do we change in our relationship with them when they leave high school, when they get into 18, 19, 20? Does the way we relate to them change than when they're 15, 16, 17? Linda, you're gonna. Yeah.
They feel like they go back. And then at some point they realize like, mommy, like that's a mommy, here's I love you, we have more experience, so. And also what you just said, I feel like definitely you treat them more as adults, like I know Shelley will always tell me, like, treat me like I'm an adult,
Right.
just talk to me like
Right.
instead of trying.
So I think a major key that we have to get better at, all of us, is trying to use those tools, those experiences that we have with maybe some of our older children who reach that 18, 19, 20, 21, because all of a sudden we start thinking about them, they want to date, they want to get married. And once they enter into that stage of life, we naturally start to treat them, like you said, more like adults. But why can't we treat them in 15, 16, and 17 like that? Right?
At that age.
Huh?
Because you said they're in a state of Pauline at that age.
I said that?
You said their brains are so.
Well, to a degree.
hard.
Yeah, and we don't help it though, right? It's true. You're not going to be perfect. There's a certain level of natural maturity that kids have to go through, experiences that they have. So it's not going to be perfect. But I definitely think there are steps that we can take that we do later on naturally for ourselves that we can try to bump up a little bit earlier in having those conversations with them and the way we relate to them that could maybe help them speed up that process earlier on by starting it earlier. It's a suggestion. I don't have teenagers. I'm relying on you guys, right? Yeah. Your experience, how many teenagers you have? You're the victim for experience, yeah.
Well, having seen the bigger picture, the idea like I kind of feel like I read more like school than my sister, more now than I did when we were in some process, because I know is that come home and appreciate what we were doing. I think it affected how I had a relationship with my schoolers. I think the more you know that they.
With your children high schoolers or your student high schoolers? Uh-huh. Uh-huh. Right. Her students, she's a teacher. Oh. I wonder if a lot of people have that experience that with their first high schooler, they're kind of learning the process, the second maybe a little more. And then when they get to number 3 and number 4, they kind of got it a little bit more because there's no question that and even within the same gender, I think we all can appreciate the fact that our children, as we look at them, mature at different speeds and at different rates. Every child is different, every experience is different. So we're trying to paint things with what do they call it? Brush strokes, large strokes. I don't know what the phrase is. What? Broad strokes, thank you, right? We're trying to paint things with broad strokes. Obviously, it's a lot more complicated than that. But I definitely think that even in our experiences, as we're seeing that we're getting better with number 3 and number 4, so I think in general, we can impart that knowledge that there is a better way, right? There is something we can do differently to make it work a little bit better at a quicker pace and avoid some of that tension and fighting and things that go on before we reach that thing. Because unfortunately, some people, it doesn't stop when they get to 18, 19, and 20. Sometimes the relationship only escalates and it stays tense and they don't develop that necessarily.
A parent has to know in that the student are filing for independence. And even if they're 17 or 18, and they don't get, you know, cover.
You're not a believer in Life 360. Ah. See, I went to see what I did there? See what I did? Yeah. Yes, yes. If I really wanted to make a massive debate, I would open up the floor to Life 360, but that's like, forget about it. Yeah. I have the students and I have the parents, and whoo boy. That's a cage match. Forget about it. Yeah. Yeah. I think they wanna feel. It's funny because it's funny you bring that up. I just want to make sure I don't go too long. It's funny you bring that up because I get overwhelmingly when I talk to kids about a lot of these tracking and Life 360 things. Most of them don't like it, but some do. Some feel makes them feel safe and secure, right? So independence is a funny thing, right? Kids want independence, but they also don't want too much of it, right? They also don't want to feel like their parent is abandoning them. They want their parent to be on their side. So independence is a very funny thing, and it's something that requires a very, very subtle balance, one that I am certainly not going to instruct you about how to do that because I'm not, you're all much more experienced in that, but it definitely is a balance. Teenagers want to feel like they have their independence, they can go where they want, they can make their plans, but they also do like the knowledge that their parent is there to take care of them, is protecting them. They're not ready yet. They know inherently they're not ready yet to face the big bad world on their own. So how you balance with that, and by the way, I think bringing the child into the conversation and letting them, because they're they're much smarter than you think they are. They know a lot of how it works. Because by the way, they also know how to beat all these things that you give them to them. They already figured all that out, right? So they're very smart. I think when you partner with your child and they see where you're coming from and you see where they're coming from and you come to a mutual agreement, I actually think that could be a lot more powerful, a lot more, and they'll stick to it, right? And sometimes they'll even come back to you and say, you know, I think I want to give you more of it. I think I want you to be on top of me a little bit more because I'm sensing that be surprised how mature kids are and how we think they're immature because we treat them immaturely. So it goes a little bit back and forth. Yeah.
Mommy was right.
Right. But they still don't listen. They'll still don't listen. They don't listen. They're still not gonna listen. Yeah.
Fear of their siblings,
Yeah.
more than they look at the parent as they, like the parent is told they don't know. But if the sibling tells them, oh, I'm telling
No
you,
question.
this is the right way.
Yeah.
Trust me, mommy told me and I didn't listen.
Well,
and
it goes back to that judging thing because children naturally see the relationship between child and parent as a vertical relationship, right? All of a sudden a sibling tells them, well, the sibling and them are on the same level, right? We're a horizontal relationship. Immediately a horizontal relationship becomes less defensive, right? Less is oh, my sibling said it. Oh, okay, that I'll hear that a little bit more than sometimes the parent, no question. So to wrap it up a little bit, I just want to give you a couple of other nice points that I came across, and there's a lot of information that we talked about here. It's definitely impossible to work on all of it. If you take one of these different things, and everybody, hopefully, I give a lot of suggestions because then everybody can kind of gravitate to something that they feel like they could do. We talked about the 7 sins and things to stay away from. We talked about hail. The way you say something is often, my mom used to always say, it's not always about what you say, but how you say it, right? So if you take the following 2 statements, where did you put my keys? Versus where'd you put my keys? Same words, totally different meanings, right? One, my register, the voice where I'm at makes a totally difference. One, I'm yelling at you. One, I'm asking you a question. One is threatening, one is not, right? So how we say things, the level of tone that we use, not raising our voices to our children, not raising our voices, I think is a huge one, right? Parents and anybody really, teachers as well, who raise their voices to students, immediately, first of all, the student won because that's what they wanted to do. They wanted to get you to raise your voice. So victory for them, check. Number 2, the more you raise your voice, the less impactful it becomes. So then they get used to yelling. So my parents yelling again. My teacher's yelling again. Big whoop. It happens every 4 times. If you never get angry to the extent where you get angry one time, all of a sudden everyone's like, ooh, okay, that's not the norm, right? Okay, that they mean business right now, right? And if you use that strategically to your advantage, in very, very limited cases, it's a powerful tool for a person, right? What level at which you speak, the volume, right? If I'm trying to give you something that's very, very important, I can raise my voice and now you have it, or I can go this and now you're focused in on what I'm saying, right? I can emphasize something by raising my voice, but I can also emphasize something by getting my voice nice and quiet, because all of a sudden everyone's, ooh, why are they changing up your register can make a big difference. These are very simple, very interesting tools that you could use to make your speech more impactful. And children will notice that you're doing that. Anybody will notice that you're doing that. And though naturally the brain has a way of gravitating towards that. I'll give you a couple of other things, food for thought, and then we'll end. Teenagers, stats show they send over 100 text messages a day, right? Probably a lot more if you looked at their WhatsApps that they're probably doing on chats, but over 100 text messages a day. They're more likely to text their friends than talk to them, which means that probably the number one skill that our children are being brought not to have, which probably the previous generation had, is how to talk to each other, right? How to speak and do exactly what we talked about, which means it's our responsibility not only to tell them how to speak, but more importantly, to model for them how to speak. When they see mom and dad having a conversation in a certain way, or they're having a conversation in a certain way, that models for them how to speak, they'll take that and use that with the way that they're going to speak towards their friends. And it really makes or breaks their social interactions and who they are as a person, how they communicate with each other.
So very strangely, if you want to live that, it's also maybe coming down to their level. If I was my 11-year-old, whenever I try to give her advice, she shuts down, she won't listen to what I say. And one time, just by chance, I texted her what my advice to her. And all of a sudden she responded, "Thank you so much, Mommy." And one time I'm doing this, and then now I forget, I regularly forget my husband wants it. When you want to teach her, like instead of a lecture, just take it to her. And she really, it resonates with her more.
That's her language then.
Wow.
So I think we should teach them how to speak, but maybe this is wrong, but sometimes you have to understand how they absorb.
It's a fascinating thing. Other people have had similar experiences as well. Very interesting. I think that's a great case of meeting people where they are, right? And I think that's a very important thing to keep in mind, because at that moment, it might be more important. You have to weigh the options. Is it more important for me to teach them this lesson, which whatever the lesson was you were discussing would get through more with a text message? Or do I feel like it's important for me to teach them how to communicate and how to speak, right? So you have to weigh those options. And in that situation, you might say, this lesson is particularly important. I'm not chancing it to a conversation. I'm going to give it to them in the language that they can understand. I think that's brilliant. I think that's very, very important. But I also think, and this is just my thoughts, but I have to think about it a little bit more. We realize that at some point in their lives, they're going to have to, their boss is not going to always text them every time something goes wrong, and their professor is not going to always text them everything. So at some point, and maybe that's not the age that she's at, it's not where they're at right now, but gradually over time, over the course of many conversations and watching conversations, we definitely want to try to give them that skill, that at some point they'll be more apt, because that's a little heartbreaking, no, that they can only take the lesson in text message than in face-to-face, because I don't know, that just doesn't sit well with me. No, 100%. That's what I'm agreeing with you. 100% you have to work with what you got. And if that lesson is super duper important at that point, you need to get that lesson across, take it the way it is. But then we also have to start thinking to ourselves over long periods of time, how do we gradually get them out of that? Because that's not a healthy way to continue to live, unless, I don't know, we're admitting defeat, which we might. I'm not ready to admit defeat just yet, right? So definitely something to think about. Always enter a conversation with an intent to learn something. Say to yourself, I can learn something from this person. No matter who it is, if you have that, you'll listen to them 100% more. You'll make them less vulnerable. You'll realize you're more vulnerable, and they'll feel like they're listening to you. Use open-ended questions. Things like, how did you feel? Or, what was that like, right? Oh, okay, now you're causing them to have to think, right? If I told you, were you scared, right? So now the son says, yeah, no, right? So they're just going to respond because you've already fed them the information that what you want to know. You narrowed yourself down to one emotion. Were you scared? Were you angry? Were you happy? Now they're just going to give you yes and no, and they're responding only to your things. Whereas if you say, how did that make you feel? Let me think about how that made me feel. They have to think about it, process it, and respond to you in a normal way. And you're going to get a lot more information from that as well. And the last and maybe best thing to do, and this is maybe one of the hardest things I do this as a teacher, I try. As a parent, it's hard. If you don't know something, say you don't know. Say you don't know. A great lesson to teach kids is, I'm a human being. I don't know everything. I don't know. Let's look it up together. Let's search it up. Or I'm not sure about that. I have to think about it. I'll get back to you. Let me think about that. When a child sees a parent say, I don't know, and he sees the parent vulnerable in the conversation, child says, oh, my parent's listening to me. Oh, I can be myself. Oh, there's a give and take here. My parent's not an authoritative know-it-all who's trying to shove things down, on my head, right? That makes a really, really big difference. So I think we talked about a lot of things. I appreciate all of the feedback. I think everything that we discussed, and I tried as much as I could in the conversation to root everything in the words of our rabbis. Our rabbis talk about not gossiping. They talk about the importance of speech. They talk about being positive and say a little, do a lot. Weigh your words in a calculated way. If you don't have anything nice to say, my grandmother said, don't say it. Sometimes use the power of silence. You don't always have to talk everything, as I'm now rambling on, right? So sometimes a little bit of silence can definitely go a long way. Use these tactics, try to be mindful and focus on one thing and see how it progresses. And don't be afraid to open it up with your students, with your children, with your parents. As you're communicating, let them know what you're working on. And I think they'll be very receptive. This will hopefully lead to a lot more meaningful conversations, a lot more meaningful relationships, and ultimately growth in the way that we want.